The beauty about the improvisation is that's like life. You don't know when it ends, but you hope, you plan, and you make it on the spot. Even if it's planned, there's always that moment where you take this path or that path. Of course, when you structure your thought and you organize it by writing, of course you can shape it into something making more sense. But it can also be something very spontaneous when it's organized, as well as very organized when it's spontaneous. It's a question of let go, while controlling not the details, but the direction. Like being over a maze, aerial view, and knowing where you go, but you choose different paths to see how you can almost get lost and see where does it lead me and how do I return. It's almost a situation where the conductor conducts the orchestra and leads by pulling the orchestra towards the conductor in order to have the musicians play it. So there is an energy that is very magnetic between the conductor and the orchestra as a mass. And the solo pianist performer is both end of the bookshelf. On one side, you are the conductor conducting the organization of the elements, and the other hand, you are the orchestra. So you anticipate constantly and you follow at the same time what you anticipate, what you heard innerly, how you monitor what you produce, how you imagine the path ahead. And of course, when you know the piece, you know how it ends. And people who listen to it and know how it ends, they're not surprised, but what they're charmed by is how you narrate it, how you say it. And then it becomes anew. And interpretation of a written piece has to give that illusion, while we all know where it ends. Now, of course, if improvisation is part of the interpretation, then the faithfulness to the notation is questioned. But then again, the notation is filtered from the composer's intent through the publisher and eventually the copyist or the composer, him or herself, but not necessarily adapted to the morphology of the performer. And the performer sees in the piece things that the composer didn't see, since by essence we are revealed by the mirror of the other. And by ourselves, we tend to organize structured ideas that lead us towards inner constructions, and then we think this is our embodiment of our thought process, and then how we caught it in emotional expression or outside of the context of the time period, in a different time period. But it's a narration. And I find that when Louis Couperin wrote or notated purposely very little in the prelude, so-called Unmeasured, and pedagogically, Bach, as a template teacher, wrote every detail from the decoration to the ornamentation. It was because this way the student learned by example in order to do their own composed improvisation or notated and then composition. But in fact, it was because the performer and the composer were the same person using these two tools at the same time, enriching each other. And therefore, when the notation was very scarce in Louis Couperin, then it would be, of course, within the context of the time period when it was written and played, which unfortunately we don't have recordings of, but we understand that the modular aspect of the music was very important, so that you adapted to the tuning of the instrument, to the order of the pieces you would play, or with improvisatory sections, and entirely improvised. If it's a suite of Baroque dances, in which key and from which suite of which composer, but not necessarily all written as to be, which Bach did. Again, Bach is a pedagogue through template. His inventions were meant not to be played as such, but learned as such, and then improvised or composed on their own by the students who in turn compose. But today the concepts are easily blurred between interpretation, improvisation, let less transcription. So if you change the instruments, if you change the details of the structure, but keep the general structure, you don't recognize the piece necessarily, or it's not meant to be. It's another way of telling through another form the same story or narration. It can be an opera, a film, a short novel, a poem, silent film, or it can be just a book that you read by yourself without needing anybody to read it to you. As interpreters in music are, so to say, readers of the page, bringing it alive for the listener. And perhaps willingly or not, they put the listener slightly in disbelief. Or perhaps they like it for wrong reasons because they like it the way it is, but it's a loss in translation, either because of the time period or the instrument or the way of construction of the phrase or the decoration of it or the ornamentation on top of the decoration, which is, of course, exchangeable, but the ornamentation by essence is unmeasured. So it has to fit within the phrasing, the melodic, the articulation, the phrase, the expression, basically the language. And then the upbeat, downbeat, the accentuation, like in spoken language, ta-ta, ta-ta, ta-ta-ta, or ta-ta, ta-ta, ta-ta-ta. And then the mind of the composer is immersed in their culture, therefore in their language. And even if they write music without lyrics, it translates, it perspires their culture, therefore their language, their way of thinking, their temperament, with individualities, because, of course, essentialization is wrong. Not all people of this are like that, of course. It's all about individualities, but they come from a common culture that in general is, or perhaps several cultures. But it's true that it's vehicled often by the language or through the language. And the music by itself is a signal that you can organize pitches and rhythms and organization of sounds in harmonies or polyphony of musical layers to express different texture-wise moods or meanings. And the rest are as expressive as the music itself, and then the functionality of the music to bury, to marry, to dance, to sing, or just to think, to reflect, to organize thoughts in terms of the, I think polyphony is more reflective, though it can be also emotional. It's not necessarily disconnected. As a matter of fact, until the end of the 19th century, most of the Western music composers didn't consider that the tonal system was a prison that they had to break out of. They expressed themselves with what they received in terms of tools. And some needed to break some of the formats in order to express what it really is in them, to bring to their own, through their own humanity to humanity. And not that they think of it always in such terms, but probably Beethoven did, Goethe did, and so on. But some other composers like Mozart didn't revolutionize the form, and Schubert neither. They took the tradition of what they received in where they were, or they captured it, whether it be the Italianate opera, whether it be string quartet writing in the Viennese school. But then, it is true that some composers like Schoenberg said at some point, and not right away in their life, let's think outside of the box. So the atonal music, by essence, rejects the organization of the sounds from before to organize a new alphabet, to organize a new language, which vehicles different values. And some are more visual when you analyze it than when you hear it without to read it, because, of course, every language is also, besides the phonemes to express the point of view of the logic of the thoughts, or to convey an opinion or a contradiction or a feeling of tenderness or passion or a lie, anything. But there is the sound of the words themselves, like in poetry, which are the music themselves without music, or the rhythm of how you say the words, how you space them. And the mother tongue of a given creator, whatever art form they create, influences somehow, somewhere, their personality, while their art is universal. But even without lyrics in music, you can still define. It's like singing a song in an instrumental version in the recording, and you recognize the tune even without the lyrics. And sometimes the lyrics, as important as they are, the melody might be more striking and reminds with you, like Mozart used to say he likes people whistling the arias of his hit tune, so to say, of his operas in the streets of Vienna. I think he liked that idea of the popular aspect of the music. But there is elitism in it, inevitably, between the education and the refinement of the understanding and the time it takes to develop the awareness, especially today for the old styles of the past, when in the past they mostly dealt with their own time period. No pun intended, but it's true that today one plays so many pieces, let's say on the piano, from different points of view of time periods, on an instrument for which is not done by ears which are not used to hear this kind of sound combinations, let less tuning, let less projecting for audiences, or recorded from close-up to be heard individually with high-definition audio or video. But the essence is the thought, the essence is the intent, and then you could think for some that you betray the way you say it or you express it, and for others you can say that you modernize it or you put it up to date, or perhaps you should not play the music of the past, just the music of the day. Or perhaps the music of today is also the modernized version of the music of the past, which for us is not the music of the past, while we make it, or even if we are aware of the time periods. So this universality of literature in its meaning for humanity, love, death, betrayal, hope, age, or the essential humanity's struggles, not to mention most essentially the spiritual uplifting, the after death, and how we believe, trust, hope, fear, and conduct ourselves accordingly, or badly. And I think it's reflected in the times when most of the music composed for us classical musicians, as we are called by others, it takes so much more than one period, but they don't consider it as a style. It's basically music of dead composers without lyrics, but even so, with songs and art songs and operas and religious works. Yeah, sacred music has lyrics, but beyond that, for all of us, when we are in classical music, we don't think we're being in a museum. We're just totally in our time with the text of the dead composers, which is so alive that we dialogue with it. Oh, why didn't he do this? Or why didn't she do that? And how will I do this as written? Or how does it supposed to sound? Or how does it mean to me, regardless how I'm taught, how I'm told, how I'm read, how I'm educated? After all, when I play with my spontaneous intuition. And I shouldn't erase it either. I should shape it with this culture of awareness and knowledge. That's why it takes so long. in fact endless. But the point of this bottomless pit is that on the way you reach other souls who are also in search of themselves through the art of the others. And in certain ways, they say every writer writes about themselves, even through fiction, or because in the fiction they introduce aspects of their experience of being on their journey of life themselves, in their journey. And it's so fascinating for us sometimes to read their fiction or to read their correspondence. And then sometimes we like to know about some of our heroes of the past as the people they were, not only the creators who they became, for which we know them because of their art. In this case of painting, poetry, sculpture, filmmaking. Sometimes oftentimes, the people who create things that are way bigger than them. After all, everything is bigger than us. The projection in our offspring, the projection in our students, the projection in anything in which we bring in forward, we pay forward what we received, aware or not, interested or not, more or less idealized, or idealizing that function. And it's so on the two sides of the receiver, and the eye of the beholder defines the value of what you transmit. But I still find it fascinating, and I will always do so, the fact that I'm a hyphen between my teacher and my students. And I try to adapt to each student whatever I received from my teacher, who adapted it to me. And when she received it from her teacher, not necessarily all in one flow, but there is some kind of lineage there, like in the case of Mademoiselle Boulanger was Gabrielle Fauré. To say that I studied with Gabrielle Fauré because I studied with Mademoiselle Boulanger, today it seems to me possible to trace that line back. But when I was studying with her, I was just in the middle of the journey, and I'm still am, but then even more so, that I didn't have this awareness. Well, I was aware that there are ways of thinking, there are ways of behaving, there are ways of responsibly and respectfully paying forward what you received, and that's what she did with me from her teacher, and that's what I do with my students, with a success that is determined only by the students themselves and what they choose to pick from you or not. And that's just the way life is. Sometimes it takes longer to be fighting some inner demons or reaching goals that the fruition of long-term expectation and preparation towards. I try not to disappoint my students individually by thinking where they are in their path of life during the time that they trust me to be their teacher. And then beyond me after, I follow from far away their path artistically or creatively in whatever they do. And it's very touching, literally, emotionally. Sometimes I like to think that when I meet some people, I always remember them the day I met them. And so if I know them for many years later and they've changed like I do, or the evolution of the seasons of life, I still see them in my eye as they were when I met them. And I think same with the students. They come at one point and they leave at another point, and in between you shared some of the understanding or the search for understanding what is our quest in the service of the muse. It's fascinating and challenging and humbling and never leaves you at peace till I do my best.